The savannah around him seemed to hold its breath, the vastness of the landscape now heavy with quiet anticipation. The lion's body, once a symbol of strength, now lay motionless, vulnerable under the relentless sun. The man's heart tightened as he studied the creature before him. There was no sign of the pride, no indication that the lion had been left behind by its family. The loneliness of the moment seemed to echo through the grasslands. It wasn't just the lion's injury that unsettled him. It was the isolation, the absence of the bond between the lion and its pride. The man knew that lions didn't wander alone like this, not without a reason. The loss of strength, the silence in the air, it all pointed to something deeper, something that he needed to address quickly. The lion's eyes flickered open once more, locking with his. There was no aggression, no growling, only a quiet acceptance of the situation, a quiet plea for help that passed between them without words. The lion's body twitched slightly as it tried to adjust, but the pain was too much. Its muscles were stiff, the wound on its side still raw, and the small movements it made only served to highlight how weak it had become. The man could see the blood soaked into the fur around the injury, a sign that the lion had been struggling for some time. Yet there was no sign of infection, no signs of fever. This, at least, was a good sign, but it was far from enough to guarantee its survival. The man reached out carefully, not wanting to startle the lion further. His fingers brushed the lion's side, a soft, careful touch meant to offer comfort. The lion's body flinched slightly at the contact, but it didn't pull away. There was no growl, no snarl, just the faintest exhalation of breath, steady yet labored. It was a moment of trust, fragile but undeniable. The man murmured softly, "I'm here to help." The lion didn't respond, but its eyes, still wide with exhaustion and pain, followed his every movement. It was clear that the lion understood, at least in part, that the man was not a threat. The moment stretched between them, quiet but charged with the weight of the lion's suffering. The man knew that the next steps had to be calculated. There was no time to waste, but he also understood that rushing could do more harm than good. He couldn't move the lion too quickly, nor could he afford to leave it alone for much longer. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached into his bag, retrieving a cloth to gently press against the wound. He needed to stop the bleeding, to stabilize the lion. The savannah felt impossibly still, the only sound the rustle of the dry grass around them. The lion's breathing grew heavier as the man worked, each breath more labored than the last. The warmth of the sun, the vast emptiness of the land, the absence of the pride, everything felt pressing in on them. The man's mind raced, analyzing the situation, considering every possibility. There was little he could do alone, but leaving the lion to fend for itself was not an option. The pain, the vulnerability, the quiet desperation, it all weighed on him. But as he looked into the lion's eyes, he knew that this was not a moment to hesitate. The man pressed the cloth firmly against the wound, trying to staunch the flow of blood. The lion winced slightly, but its body grew still again, as if accepting the man's touch. The moment felt sacred, fragile, a silent exchange between two creatures bound by the shared understanding of survival and care. The lion's body, once powerful and unyielding, now seemed like a fragile vessel, held together by nothing more than the quiet persistence of the man's actions. Minutes passed, each one stretched out, filled with uncertainty, but as the man worked, he felt a small shift. The lion's breathing had slowed, becoming more steady, though still strained. The harsh reality of the savannah was never more apparent than in moments like this, the thin line between life and death, between strength and fragility. But for now, the lion was still alive, and that was enough. The man knew that the real work was just beginning. He would need help, but for now he had done what he could. The lion was no longer alone in its pain. The man's hand hovered near the lion's head, each movement slow and deliberate, aware of the creature's immense power and sharp instincts. The lion lay still, its body trembling slightly beneath the surface, its massive chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Its eyes flickered open again, the golden irises catching the light just enough for the man to see them, the confusion, the pain, the vulnerability. The lion's gaze locked onto his, a silent question in the air. Was this human a threat or a help? Could he be trusted? There was no hostility, no anger, only the rawness of survival, of a mighty animal brought low by injury. The man's breath slowed, his heart thumping in time with the lion's shallow breathing. He knew that the moment he had been waiting for was now here, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. The lion's huge form, normally an embodiment of power, now seemed fragile, the beast of the savannah reduced to a wounded creature. The man had come to help, but he understood that this was no simple rescue. The lion was not yet ready to trust him, not in its current state. The animal's posture was stiff, its muscles taut as it lay on the ground, unsure of what would happen next. With great care, the man reached out, gently placing a hand on the lion's head. His touch was soft, almost reverent, as if he understood that such an intimate contact could only be given once trust had been earned. The lion's body tensed under his palm, and its eyes never left him, full of suspicion. Yet it did not move away. The lion's steady gaze spoke of wariness, but also an unspoken understanding. There was no immediate sign of aggression, just a shared moment of silence between two creatures of different worlds, caught in an exchange neither could fully articulate. He continued speaking in soft tones, his voice almost a whisper, the words meant as much to calm his own nerves as to reassure the lion. "I'm not here to hurt you," he murmured, though he knew the lion couldn't understand the specifics of his words. His voice was a thread of peace in the chaos of the savannah, and for a moment it seemed to soothe the lion. Its breathing steadied, no longer as frantic, though the pain in its body remained. The man could feel the tension easing ever so slightly beneath his hand. The lion's large frame still trembled with the strain, but there was less fear in its movements now, and that was enough. The man did not move away. He remained by the lion's side, his touch still light and steady, watching for any signs of improvement. The lion's breaths became more regular, though the deep, steady rumble of its chest had not yet returned to its normal rhythm. The lion's eyes, once full of fear, were less frantic now, though still uncertain. The man could see the mistrust lingering, but it wasn't the sharp, defensive gaze he had first encountered. This was the look of an animal caught in a fragile moment, torn between its survival instincts and the unfamiliar presence of a potential helper. There was no rush. The man knew that the lion's recovery, if it came at all, would take time. There was no certainty about how long it would take for help to arrive, and there was no way to guarantee the outcome. All he could do was stay present, calm, patient, waiting. As each minute passed, the bond between them, tenuous as it was, seemed to grow. The man could feel it in the quiet stillness between them, in the subtle relaxation of the lion's muscles under his touch. This wasn't a battle of wills. It was a slow, silent negotiation, a dance of trust that neither could force. With each passing minute, the man allowed himself to sink deeper into the moment, focusing on the steady rhythm of the lion's breathing. Time seemed to slow in the vastness of the savannah, the world around them quiet, as if holding its breath. The lion, though still full of uncertainty, had accepted the man's presence, if only for a while. The man knew that his patience, his stillness, would be the key to gaining the lion's trust. There were no quick fixes, no sudden bursts of action that would change the situation. The man was simply there, calm, steady, waiting for the right moment when he could do more. The man's mind raced as he surveyed the lion's injury. The wound was deep, the flesh torn and raw, and the risk of infection loomed large. The vastness of the savannah seemed to stretch endlessly around him, an unforgiving landscape with no immediate resources for proper care. Alone, he knew he was powerless to address the full extent of the injury. The lion, once a symbol of strength, now lay vulnerable before him, unable to move. The man's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his radio, the urgency of the situation pressing heavily on his chest. He steadied his breath, knowing that any hesitation now could cost the lion precious time. "This is Ranger 12, he spoke into the radio, his voice calm but laced with a quiet urgency. "I've found an injured lion. It's severe, deep wound, can't move. I'm alone and need immediate assistance. Over." The words seemed to hang in the air, each one carrying the weight of the moment. He paused, listening intently for any response, the silence on the other end feeling like an eternity. Every second stretched out, each one a reminder of the lion's shallow breathing, its weakened body still lying in the dust, vulnerable and exposed. His heart pounded in his chest, and a heavy sense of helplessness settled over him. He knew he had done what he could, kept the lion still, applied the basic measures to stem the bleeding, but he couldn't do this alone. The savannah was vast, and even with all his experience, the complexity of the injury required more than what he had at hand. His eyes flickered back to the lion, whose head still rested on the earth, eyes half open, the pain and exhaustion evident in every shallow breath it took. The man's chest tightened as he waited for the faintest sound from the radio, hoping for the reassurance that help was on its way. A few agonizing moments passed before the radio crackled back to life. "Ranger 12, we're on our way. Hold on." The words, though simple, brought a rush of relief. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something, a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty. The man exhaled slowly, the tension in his body easing, but only slightly. There was still much to be done, and much could go wrong. He looked at the lion, his body still tense, its breathing slow but consistent. The help he needed was on the way, but until they arrived, he was all that stood between the lion and the wild's harsh reality. "I'm here with you," he whispered softly to the lion, his words more for himself than for the animal. He didn't expect an answer, knowing full well that the lion, in its weakened state, was beyond responding. But in that moment, the act of speaking, of acknowledging the lion's struggle, was all he had. The lion's eyes flickered again, a brief glimmer that could have been recognition, or perhaps just the fading remnants of consciousness. The man stayed close, his presence calm, offering what little comfort he could. His role now was simple: to wait, to hope, to trust that the rangers would arrive in time to offer the care the lion needed to survive. The world around them felt still. The breeze that usually swept across the savannah had quieted, the sounds of distant life barely reaching him. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the landscape, but time seemed to lose its meaning. The man's heart beat steadily in his chest, each moment dragging on, and he stayed there, unmoving, knowing that the lion's survival now rested not just on his actions, but on the arrival of help. He could only hold his breath and wait for the rangers to reach him, hoping they would arrive in time to give this lion the chance to heal. The savannah, once so quiet, now seemed to hold its breath. The man's hand rested gently on the lion's head, feeling the steady rise and fall of its chest beneath his touch, yet the air felt unnaturally still, as though the land itself was waiting. Every sound seemed muted, the normal hum of the wild fading into an uneasy silence. It was in this stillness that the shift occurred, barely noticeable at first. A movement at the edge of the clearing caught his eye. His heart quickened as his gaze turned toward it, and there, emerging from the tall grasses, was a figure, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably familiar. A lioness. She moved with a caution that spoke of the wild's deep wisdom, her every step purposeful, yet tempered by an underlying wariness. Her golden eyes were fixed squarely on the injured lion, and the man felt the weight of her gaze. His breath hitched, unsure of what would unfold next. The lioness didn't charge. There was no immediate aggression, but her posture was tense, the muscles beneath her sleek coat coiled like springs, ready to react if necessary. She stopped at a safe distance, her eyes flicking between him and the wounded lion, assessing the situation. The moment stretched, the air thick with unspoken tension. The man remained as still as he could, his hand still resting on the lion's head, grounded in the present, but acutely aware of the fragile nature of this moment. His eyes remained locked on the lioness, knowing that every second mattered. She was not just a predator, he realized. She was something more, a protector, perhaps a mother, drawn to the sight of her kin. The realization hit him like a sudden wave. This was not just an injury, this was family, and the lioness had come to witness, to understand, perhaps even to decide the fate of her own. The bond between these two lions was undeniable, woven in the silent understanding that only creatures of the wild could share. The man's heart pounded in his chest, the rhythm of it syncing with the quiet intensity of the scene before him. His eyes never left the lioness. She was cautious, deliberate in her movements, but her gaze was fixed firmly on the injured lion, as though she could already sense the depth of the connection they shared. For a long moment, neither animal moved, neither the lioness nor the injured lion. The man held his breath, his body still, a quiet observer of a world much older than his own. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, one that would unfold without his interference. The bond between the lions was a language beyond words. It was ancient, something that didn't need to be explained, just felt. Then, almost imperceptibly, the lioness shifted her weight and took a single, careful step forward. Her movements were measured, but there was no hesitation in the way she moved. It wasn't aggression that drove her. It was a quiet, calculated care. She had made her decision. The lioness did not rush, did not charge in. Instead, she closed the distance slowly, with an intention that was as deliberate as the stillness that had filled the clearing. She was not approaching to dominate, but to understand, to claim her own, perhaps to ensure that her family, her kin, would not be taken from her. The man's breath caught in his throat, his heart racing, yet his body remained frozen in place. He knew that this was a critical moment, not just for the injured lion, but for the entire scene unfolding before him. The lioness, once a distant figure in the savannah, was now the very heartbeat of the moment, her every movement speaking volumes. The quiet understanding between the animals and the man who observed them wove a fragile thread of trust, one that connected them, if only for this fleeting moment. The lioness paused, her amber eyes never leaving the injured lion. The air around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. She stood, still and powerful, as if to say that this was her family, her responsibility, and no matter the injury, she would be the one to decide what happened next. The man, though filled with a deep sense of awe, didn't move a muscle. He remained in the background, respectful of the wild's unspoken rules, understanding that this was their moment, and he was merely a quiet witness. The lioness stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate, as if every step was taken with the weight of the moment. Her body, once tense, now seemed to soften as she approached the injured lion. Her eyes, fixed on him, were steady and full of purpose. There was no panic, no rush, only the quiet understanding that this was the moment she had been waiting for. The man held his breath, watching the silent exchange unfold before him, feeling the tension of the situation dissolve into the stillness of the savannah. As the lioness lowered her head, her nose brushed gently against the side of the injured lion, a soft, soothing nudge that was more a whisper than a touch. The lion's body tensed for a moment, a brief flicker of uncertainty, but it relaxed almost immediately under her presence, surrendering to the quiet strength that she offered. There were no sounds of distress, no growls or roars, just the soft breath of the lioness as she remained beside the injured lion. Her movements were tender, almost reverential as she nudged him again, her body language radiating care and reassurance. The lion's breath, once ragged and shallow, seemed to deepen, its body gradually settling into the calm rhythm of its mate's presence. The savannah, which had held its breath for so long, seemed to exhale. With them, the tension that had been thick in the air now slowly dissipating. The wind, carrying the scent of the grasses, stirred lightly, as if the entire landscape was witnessing this quiet moment of healing. The man, who had watched them closely, took a small step back. His role in the moment was no longer necessary. He had intervened when he needed to, offering his help, his presence, but now the lioness had come, and the bond between them was undeniable. The lioness had found her way to her partner, and she had taken over. The man stood quietly, giving them space, allowing this sacred moment to unfold. There was no need for words or action. What he was witnessing now was something far more profound than anything he could do. The connection between the lioness and the injured lion was ancient and unspoken, a bond forged in the heart of the wild, something that transcended human intervention. As the lioness remained by the lion's side, nudging him gently with each movement, the atmosphere in the savannah seemed to change. For the first time since the man had arrived, the lion's breathing steadied, no longer harsh or strained. The tension in the lion's body loosened as the lioness continued to provide the comfort it needed. Her presence was all that was required, a silent testament to the power of nature's bonds. The savannah, vast and timeless, seemed to breathe again, its pulse in sync with the quiet rhythm of life being restored before it. The man watched, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep within him. The lioness had healed more than just the lion's body. She had healed the space between them, the bond between them that had been broken, now restored in silence. With a deep breath, the man exhaled slowly, his chest filling with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing his part was done. The lioness had taken the lead, and now the savannah would continue its course. He had been there when the lion needed help, but it was the wild that had taken over. The lioness had come to her partner, and together they would face what lay ahead. The moment, though brief, had been enough. The bond between the two lions was unspoken, yet it held the weight of everything that needed to be said. In the quiet, tender touch of the lioness, the wild had once again found its strength. The man stood for a while longer, watching as the lioness remained at the injured lion's side. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the savannah, in all its complexity and raw beauty, had restored the wild in ways that went beyond human understanding. Slowly he began to step away, his gaze lingering on the pair as they began to settle into the quiet of the savannah. The lioness had come, and the healing had begun. It was a moment of trust, of nature's quiet power, and the man knew that he would carry this moment with him forever.